Hello, and welcome to another edition of Shirenomics. My name is Jonathan Cooper, and I'm the Community and Economic Development Specialist at the Bennington County Regional Commission.
And I'm Matt Harrington, the Executive Director of the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce. And like we do in most of our shows, this is going to be the first 5 minutes, just kind of a download of what we're working on or what we think is interesting happening in the region of Southwestern Vermont, or what we call affectionately the Shires of Vermont. And so I guess it's my turn to start this show. And just as I mentioned in my title intro, Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce, we had taped last time, and it was just around that time that we had made the announcement that the Bennington Chamber of Commerce, or what would become Bennington Regional Chamber of Commerce, probably fit the region a little bit better if we changed the name on that. And so on January 31st of 2020, at our annual meeting, we introduced to our full membership the new name of the chamber, which better represented the full 17-town region of Southwestern Vermont. And so this is going to be a year of road shows. I just got back from one in Dorset, where we had people not only from Dorset, but outside of Dorset, really coming to us and having a great conversation around what they see as a need and opportunity in the region, and where perhaps a Southwestern Vermont Chamber could help. So we're going to be doing roadshows throughout the county over the next year, really hearing from member and non-member alike, hearing from communities, and so really trying to figure out, what does the Chamber of tomorrow look like to you, and where do we add a benefit to that? And I think at the very least, what we hear time and time again, both pre-Southwestern Vermont Chamber and even post, is the connection part of that we're paying into a membership and into an organization that kind of threads the needle through various narratives, whether that's economic development or tourism or community development. And so if we can be that partner, that advocate, that connector, or even that catalyst, that's what we want to do at the Chamber. And so that's what's exciting for us these recent days.
Very cool. Some early returns from members. Are they supportive of the name change?
Yes. I think what was great, perhaps somewhat mistakenly on our part, but we had been on, since 2017, our 2020 vision. So we had really warmed up both membership and community alike, I think, to the notion. And so by the time we announced it, the feedback, which is actually better feedback than what we could have gotten, was, well, it's about time. And that's, of course, what you want to hear in any change initiative is, this should have happened yesterday. And I'm happy to be slow to the take if it means more embracing of the name. So we've gotten overwhelming support, both in emails and phone calls, and just seeing our members out in the region. Very excited. I think it was a big move for this 109-year-old organization to move away from Bennington in its name. We didn't take it lightly. We did a lot of discussion points with our board and with our staff and with members, all leading into really dissolving that Bennington Chamber and reemerging as a Southwestern Vermont Chamber. A lot of work still to be done, but like I said, we were up in Dorset this morning. We're here in Sunderland now. So with our best effort, we are trying to be region-wide.
And actually, so happy 109th birthday, and that puts me in mind of a few other big birthdays that are upcoming or have happened in recent years. Looking forward to Mac Molding's 100th birthday.
Yes, congratulations.
Congratulations to them on 100 great years. Looking forward to 100 more. Want to see what the Kennels have up their sleeve for next week's surprise.
I hear it, yeah, it's a big one.
It's going to be big.
75 was a big one. It was like a Disney World trip or something, Disneyland, right?
It was a big one, so this is going to be big as well. So I'm sure everyone there is looking very forward to that. Put me in mind, though, of a couple other birthdays in the last few years. The Church Insurance Group recently reached their 100th birthday or anniversary, as did the Bank of Bennington. So there's some deep roots in this community with some of our employers of choice, Signal employers, and so you just want to congratulate them on a century of success. Looking forward to the next century.
Do you ever wonder, like 100 years ago, what they even were building with? Like, was there horse-drawn things carrying the Bank of Bennington to its current glory? Like the wood slab? I mean, just think about it. I've heard stories of boys being on the top of the public house barn, having to raise the telephone wires so the barn could be rolled down Harwood Hill on lumber logs to its current spot. So we'd have to check in with Steve Bryant if he knows any of the current history on the public house.
The insurance rates might have been a little challenging back then.
What about you, John? What are you excited about?
Top of mind for me is something that I think some of you maybe have seen in the newspapers recently and GNAT elsewhere. As many Manchester continues its pivot to sports tourism. I think it's something that's worth celebrating and talking about a little bit. In this instance, it was Black Rock Football Club that'll sort of have a few weeks or months in residence in Manchester at Applejack Fields. And this is a really good complement to the existing sort of retail tourism that exists there, and also expanding the shoulders of that recreation season. We have the Vermont Summer Festival up in the North Shire. There's the Stratton Mountain School and a whole lot of other competitive skiing in the Bromley, Stratton region, as well as the snowshoe championships down in the South Shire. So I think this move will pay off. I think it'll give people some great exposure to Manchester, the North Shire's hospitality sector, but also give some families an opportunity to think about as they're watching their students or their children who are students at Middlebury, UMass Amherst, BU, Dartmouth, etc., coming up for some of those summer and spring soccer series, lacrosse games. I think it'll give a lot of families a chance to think about maybe the next phase when the college years are done, or perhaps making a move more imminently. And that's, I think, a decision that I know the town didn't take lightly, but I want to sort of applaud the leadership there. I think that that's going to go a long way for them.
Well, and I think it's going to be interesting for two economic guys to be watching this pivot that's been happening. You know, Manchester wasn't always the Manchester we know of today. 80s and 90s, we saw the emergence of the Halbins and people like that were embracing that outlet structure. And now we see this slight pivot, and it'd be interesting to follow that through if we're back here in 10 years talking about what a pivotal pivot that was, and good, as you mentioned, good leadership by O'Keefe and the others at that table to see perhaps putting another, I always mention it's the arrows in the quiver, and I'd rather have more arrows than less arrows. So, it's okay to have kind of both worlds too.
For sure. Yeah, no need to choose between the two. Well, that's sort of top of mind for the both of us. We'll be back in just a moment with Dr. Joshua Sherman of Old Mill Road Recording and Old Mill Road Media. So stick with us. We'll see you back in a moment. Thank you.
All right, well, we're back here at Shirenomics, and joining us today is Dr. Joshua Sherman, who has an amazing background. I think the reason we have him on the show today is all the work that he's doing in Arlington and really throughout the region, and maybe even an argument could be all throughout Vermont. Joshua, give us just a kind of a glimpse of the background. I mean, you've obviously got a doctor in front of your name. I know you're a performing artist. You've got a media studio at Old Mill Road Media, and I think we're also going to talk about Old Mill Road Recording as well. So just a wealth of stuff that's happening in Arlington. Give us a little bit of that background.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on the show. My background is that my mom is an Emmy Award-winning lyricist and playwright. My aunt's a composer, so I grew up in the world of theater and music, and from a young age, I saw them developing new works, and I very much enjoyed that. I was trained in really all of the arts, so piano, saxophone, drawing, sculpture, painting, tap, ballroom, jazz, ballet, you name it, every day.
I told you.
I was groomed in the arts. We often joke it was like Mickey and Judy at the MGM lot. No drugs involved. And but what happened was my father's a physician, and so I always loved the sciences. I loved outdoors. I was never interested in medicine itself, but I loved fossils and earth science, really. And when I went to school in New York City, I started very young, and I was very lucky to have a series of mentors within the arts who were really legends in the field. The caricaturist Al Hirschfeld from the New York Times, these Broadway and film designers, Tony Walton, who designed Mary Poppins, All That Jazz, Oscar, Tony, Emmy-winning Willa Kim, who did all these legendary works of theater and dance. And so at a young age, I was the kid. It was really an old school apprenticeship where I was scooped up and really groomed. And I was in my last year, and meanwhile I was in college, and in my last year I had this moment where I got a letter from the registrar who said, if you want to graduate, you have to take a 100-level science course. And I took a 6-week course in nutrition, and I saw that all of these I asked a question in class, and I realized that all of these skills that I had developed in the arts were really the same skills used in medicine. Communication skills, listening skills, being able to ask questions, attention to detail, research and history, sort of enjoying history and research. And I had this funny moment, really from the problem-solving aspect, and I thought it was truly a Legally Blonde moment where I thought I could be a doctor, and so I went to the head of the science department. I started taking the courses to get into medical school, and attended Stony Brook University on Long Island. I was there for both medical school and residency, and in the meantime, that's when I shifted from designing on Broadway to producing, because when you're a designer, you're working on 6-7 projects at once. When you are but the schedule is not yours. You don't determine any of that. But as a producer, I could work on projects independently. And particularly, I love developing new works because I grew up in a house where new works were being developed. And so I so I started producing new musicals. And of course, the first thing people ask is, oh, what's the music like? And that's how I got into the music studio and met Ben Arundel, who's our in-house Grammy-winning engineer at Old Mill Road Recording. And so for the last 20 years, he and I have been collaborating. Jumping ahead, because like you said, there's a lot of history there. In 2009, I moved to southern Vermont. I'd been coming here since I was a kid, and there were these mentors of mine, Pat and Fred Carmichael, who are well known to Dorset and really created the Caravan Players, which was the precursor of the Dorset Players. And Bill Opperly and so many others here in southern Vermont, I was sitting around a breakfast table with them, and they said, oh, you know, they're looking for doctors in Bennington. I said, yeah, you just want to have a young doctor around. And the whole group said, yes. And so I moved here on a 1-year contract and started working at the hospital in Bennington, and it was a wonderful experience doing internal medicine and critical care. It's a wonderful community hospital. And over time, initially I was producing in New York still, and doctoring up here, and it was a week there, a week here, a week there, a week here, and that got really exhausting. And I thought, well, I'm the producer. Why am I killing myself going down there? Why not produce up here? There's such an amazing arts community and so many industry people in southern Vermont. So I produced a new healthcare show pilot. I did a series of mini musicals. I was producing a lot, but what I found is that the infrastructure was not in place to really churn out content. You're able to produce a show because GNAT has this available to you as a studio that with cameras, with staffing. But the truth is, if you don't have an infrastructure to do high quality content, you need the people, you need the locations, you need the talent. And the main thing that we really needed was great sound. And I found myself, no matter how good the project was, I still had to go to the city for pre-production or post-production audio. And that's how so in 2013, I took a pause from producing up here because I saw that it wasn't sustainable without a hub for collaboration, and that brings us to Old Mill Road. I'd been going to, most people know the grist mill from 1764 in East Arlington. Most people know it as the Candle Mill. For 47 years, it was a major tourist destination, similar to the Vermont Country Store, and Simon Pierce up north. And what happened was East Arlington was really a beautiful town that was somewhat in slumber, and but no one messed with it. There wasn't a McDonald's or a gas station right in the middle of town. It was still very beautiful and romantic, and it was a place that I'd loved since I was a kid. Our holiday cards every year showed a picture of me and my sister growing up. Every year we took photos by the river, and so in 2014 I purchased the original mill along with 2 of its corresponding buildings, and the mill was built by Remember Baker, and he was first cousins with Ethan Allen and Seth Warner, and so this was a revolutionary place for where the revolutionaries met with great ideas, and it seemed to be sort of the beginning of this larger vision for creating both a media production company and an actual production facility. And so the way I say it is, think of Paramount Pictures and Paramount Studios. One supports the other, and really that's where Old Mill Road and Old Mill Road Recording and Old Mill Road Media sort of come together as sort of a destination for creatives.
So you mentioned Old Mill Road Media. Let's talk also a little bit about that as well. Sure. So in your, suite of publications that currently Old Mill Road Media operates and produces and distributes, we've got the Manchester Life, we've got Stratton Magazine, we've got Vermont Magazine, which was just purchased last year, correct? And the Vermont News Guide as well. So talk to us a little bit about, first, what each one of of those kind of does for you in your suite of publications, and then maybe some of the direction you see them going as. I know some were birthed out of this concept, and then some were purchased, and you're giving some redirection and some new artistic creativity in some of them. So give us a little bit of that.
Sure. I think in order to put that in context, I just want to take one quick step back. The larger vision is that there are really 4 arms to Old Mill Road: media and recording and sort of the whole Old Mill Road brand. That the first arm is spaces for development and collaboration, where artists and creatives can develop new ideas. Then there's a pipeline to production. By having a full-scale production facility in East Arlington, it allows us to produce high-quality content of all varieties. From there, the next hurdle is typically after, okay, so you've produced something, how do you get it distributed? And then from there, distribution is completely dependent on promotion. And so those are really the 4 arms. And that's where Old Mill Road Media, with the current 4 publications, really come into play, in that it's not just about showcasing what we're doing, it's really about showcasing Vermont.
Sure.
And I tell our team the whole regularly, Vermont is the brand. That is what we are selling. And so and there are different target demographics with each one of those. So Manchester Life is a once-a-year tourism guide that really showcases Manchester and its surrounding areas, and it's available for anyone who's visiting here, and it's really geared towards tourism. Then we've got Vermont Magazine. When we bought Vermont Magazine, which has been around for 30 years and was a beautiful publication, but one of the things that I said to our team was, we need to decide, is Vermont Magazine, once again, sort of a tourism brochure, or is Vermont Magazine something that sort of encompasses Vermont today? And I said, think of the New Yorker magazine. If you're in New York, it's the go-to guide. And it's not about tourism. It certainly helps tourists. But also, if you're in the middle of Kansas, but you're from New York, you connect with it in a way that makes you feel like it embodies your place, your home. And that's what we are really hoping to do with Vermont Magazine. Over the last year, we've been working with a wonderful team of Vermonters, really trying to capture how do we both remain true to the traditional sense of Vermont, covered bridges, maple syrup, all those things, that the beautiful scenery, all those things that people love, while also actually showcasing the young entrepreneurs, some of the redevelopments of the different buildings and towns, the reinvention of all of these old spaces, so that you're really connecting both history and the present day. And so that's what we're really building with Vermont Magazine, both as the brand for Vermont and Vermonters, but then also outside of Vermont, people can connect to it. With Stratton Magazine, it's a beautiful luxury magazine that's really focused on it's for, of course, the locals, but also the second homeowners, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, who come up for their destination weekends and seasonally, but it's a wonderful relationship with Stratton, and that's longstanding. And then last but certainly not least is the News Guide. I have to tell you that those same people who convinced me to come to Vermont to be a doctor, they used to send me the News Guide every week before I would come to Vermont, so I would know what was going on. So the fact that I own the News Guide now is really very exciting, because as a kid, it was my connection to what's going on. Where's the chicken pie supper that we're going to this weekend? And it's really very community oriented. The News Guide is something that is free to everyone. The only cost is if people want it mailed to them. It's essentially the cost of postage, but we really love the fact that we're remaining community oriented, and it's traditionally been for Southern Vermont, but we're increasingly expanding outside the region, because we once again feel that there are a lot of communities that are not being recognized, and we want to make sure to be as inclusive as possible.
Great.
Very cool. That's I think there's a lot a lot to that the borders that maybe we have from administrative perspectives don't really reflect the way that towns are interconnected throughout, our mountain ranges, our valleys, et cetera. So it's really nice to hear that the news guide could sort of be that watershed for many communities around the region and beyond. One of the interesting things that you mentioned in sort of discussing these four arms, it got me thinking about some of the professions, some of the work that goes into all these productions and all this output. You mentioned Ben, sort of as we now have a Grammy award-winning producer here in the region. That's extremely exciting. But it got me thinking a little bit about that notion of the recording studio that's there by the stream, by the brook, and we have our playhouses, our historic estates and homes, and our museums where people can go and consume culture. What you're talking about is a place where people produce cultural elements, and that it's not that unusual to think of it being nestled someplace. That cultural production is not always about the big city or the studio lots. And so I'd like to hear a little bit about that idea of a destination for cultural production.
Sure. I mean, Arlington has this incredible history, right? So I already mentioned the Revolutionary and the Green Mountain Boys who were there at the mill, but the truth is Arlington has always been a home to creatives, and from the 1930s to the 1960s, it was not just Norman Rockwell, but 5 other Saturday Evening Post illustrators. You had Dorothy Canfield Fisher, who was really the Oprah of her day, creating the Book of the Month Club, and Carl Ruggles, Atonal Music, just down the road, Robert Frost, 2 minutes away, Grandma Moses. I mean, so it's really fascinating that this was always a hub for artists to create and produce, and it wasn't necessarily thought of in that way because it wasn't necessarily film or music, although with Carl Ruggles it was. But the truth is that that's what we're doing. Artists has been a home to creatives, and we're just the next generation. I always joke it's Star Trek, the next generation. But the idea of destination recording studio is that if you're in New York City, if you're in LA, if you're in Atlanta, Georgia, or Nashville, their large studios either don't exist as much as they used to because the studio system has changed, but also there's a lot of pressure. You're essentially booking studio time. There's a knock on the door. Your time is up. It is not conducive to the creative process. And so the notion of destination recording is something that has been around for a while. It was really funny when the movie Bohemian Rhapsody came out about 1.5 years ago, and of course they showed them holed up in a barn in the middle of nowhere, and that's where Bohemian Rhapsody was created. Well, that's sort of the same idea, that we took these buildings from the 1700s right next door to the mill, right on the river, and created a new type of destination recording. So we essentially have in-house Grammy-winning engineer. You have a very different vibe. It's not dark and sort of cave-like. It's very light, airy. We're right on the river, so when you're creating, you're actually watching the waterfall coming at you. And we just won the award for being the sort of the best studio in the world. The NAMM Tech Award is literally like the Grammy or Oscar of the studio design industry. So we really have pristine acoustics, and it's every artist who comes in really just responds to it in a way saying they've never seen anything like it, and we're very proud of that.
And in East Arlington, we're not talking about a very large village. How has it been for you getting to know the neighbors, getting to know the village? Obviously, it's not new to you. It's a place you spent a lot of time growing up.
Well, it's great. It's really funny because you may not. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a wonderful restaurant in East Arlington when I was growing up called Phyllis's, and Melanie Allen, who owns the Gourmet Deli, it was her mom, and I've known Melanie since I was 12 because they used to have the best chicken and biscuits in town.
Sounds like a Vermont story.
Yeah, no, totally. And so the truth is, when you ask, how is it meeting the neighbors? Some of them I've known for many years. Others have been, I think in general, people have been incredibly supportive because they, number one, people who are in their 80s and 90s, they were Norman Rockwell models. The notion of artists in the community, it's normal to them. Like, it doesn't feel weird.
That's a great point.
And I think a lot of people, their kids or grandkids have moved away. They're not interested in the property, and the fact that we've been able to reinvent the town in a way that is respectful of the both the geography and the history, while also bringing some young energy to the town, is really exciting to everyone. And we're really proud of that, and we're working with the town to make sure that that we maintain good relationships with our neighbors.
Just sort of a best practices example of what community development and economic development can be working together. Yeah, and that's really delightful to hear, for sure.
Definitely. Well, Dr. Joshua Sherman, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Shirenomics. And I think with that, we'll close the show. Jon, any final thoughts for our viewers?
This is another one of these great examples that we've been able to bring onto the show in the recent months, hearing from people that have either new to the community or have been part of the community for decades. And this is the sort of economic development and community development that we hope to feature on Shirenomics. And so we're so glad that Dr. Sherman took the time to join us today. Another wonderful example of what makes this part of the country a different place.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much.